Alrighty, well, thank you again so very much for being here tonight. I realize it's fairly late in the evening, but if you don't already know, I am Sarah from Dandelion Seeds Positive Parenting. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I love being able to speak with people to support them on their parenting journey. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, by the way, so I think I'm going to mute anybody who needs to be muted there. I think I just muted somebody. And if you have something you want to add, feel free to either type it in the chat or by all means come back and you can interrupt me anytime if something really resonates with you, or if something I say doesn't make sense and you want to, probe a little bit farther with me. I welcome interactive discussion if you are comfortable with that. So with that, as I mentioned, I'm Sarah of Dandelion Seeds Positive Parenting. I teach positive parenting mini courses. I teach thousands of parents around the world how to have more peaceful relationships with their children. My training is fairly widespread, everything from trauma recovery to improvisational comedy, because one thing we know about parenting is that we all need to have a sense of humor, right? So I definitely have both ends of the proverbial spectrum. And my goal in life is to help every family I reach have a more peaceful relationship with their children. And a lot of us, let's be honest, a lot of us did not grow up in particularly peaceful homes. Maybe things were okay sometimes, maybe they were never okay. Or maybe we had the incredible blessing and gift of growing up in a home that felt pretty peaceful and pretty great most of the time. But that is actually very, very much in the minority. So knowing that we all bring in stuff, we all bring in traumas, we all bring in hardships, we all bring in generational patterns where we can look back and say, you know what? That didn't feel good to me growing up. I didn't like the way that went down, and I want to do better for my children. So how do I do that? One thing we do know from brain science is that we cannot learn in negatives. So if I come in here and say to you, you know what? My childhood was awful. All I know for sure is I don't want to do what my parents did. Well, my brain doesn't really know what to do with that, because my brain says, okay, don't do that. But there's this big gap of what do I do instead? So I need to figure out, what does it look like? How can I manifest and grow with this peaceful relationship that I want to have? But I've got to be really specific about the emotional tone of the relationship that I want to feel in order for that healing to take place. And I need to know the specifics of how to do it. So we'll get into some of the how-tos in this video, in this chat tonight. So I will give you some very actionable tools that you will be able to take away and use in your own parenting. And that said, a lot of us simply fall back into some of the patterns that we knew growing up because, and it makes perfect sense, we learn patterns, just like we learn to walk and we say, okay, when I walk, I put my left foot in front of my right, and then I alternate and I keep going like this. This is how I walk. The brain has figured out that's how walking works. Well, the same kind of thing happens emotionally. We might have learned, for example, you know what, when somebody is yelling, when somebody is mad, when somebody is displeased with somebody else, this is what they do. The brain creates pathways, or basically a roadmap, that works just like the learning to walk thing, where it says, oh, this is how I do it. When we're growing up, if our parents or our caregivers say, this is how I handle a particular emotion, our brains learn, oh, that's how it's done. So of course it makes perfect sense that we would oftentimes perpetuate those patterns in our own parenting, even if we know they didn't feel too good to us while we were growing up. So the good news is there is, and I've got a big fancy word for you, but there is something called neuroplasticity, which basically just means we can learn new habits. We can learn new habits. We can learn new patterns. We can learn new ways of doing things That just like, I'm going to keep going with the walking example. Let's say that a child learned and the child is physically able to walk left, right, left, right, just like we do. But let's say there's a child who learned, to walk, I only hop on my left foot and I keep going that way. If the child learns, I only hop on my left foot, okay, that's what they're going to do. Just like any parenting that we may not want to perpetuate with our own children is kind of like our brain has learned, I only hop on my left foot. Well, if somebody then comes along to our child and says, you know what, there's this other way you can do it, try this left, right business. And the child goes, oh my goodness, okay, I don't know why I didn't think of that, but I'm going to practice this. And guess what? Eventually, that way starts to feel more natural to them. Similarly, when we are trying to change patterns in parenting, it's kind of like we've been hopping on one foot thinking this is the right way to do it. Of course, we hop on one foot. Maybe that looks like yelling for us, or maybe it looks like some other form of parenting that we know it's not what we want it to be, but it's what we find ourselves doing when we are stressed or when we're struggling. So how can we teach ourselves there are other ways? Well, it's going to sound obvious, but basically we need to figure out what is it we want to be doing. And then we need to continually practice doing that thing. Continuing with the walking example, if that child wakes up the very next day, even if it's the day after they learned left, right walking, they might get out of bed and start hopping on one foot again because it's all they've ever known. They might need to think about it and say, oh, you know what? Yesterday, I learned that left, right type of walking rather, and that actually felt better to my body and it seemed to work better for getting from place A to place B. So my point here is I want you to know that when you are trying to learn new patterns, when you are trying to establish new habits with your children, it makes perfect sense that you would do things the old way for a while until the new way becomes second nature, until you say, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to fall down sometimes. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to do this thing that I have always done because it's all I've ever known. And we know that just like children don't develop in this beautiful linear way, it's really kind of mountainous, right? Like, oh, one day they can do the skill. The next day, oh, not so much. It's not working so well. Well, revising our parenting is the same kind of thing. It's not like, oh, I read this book on how to be a more peaceful parent, and now I know everything there is to do, and it works perfectly in my home. Absolutely not. It is very, very common and very, very natural for us to have bumps along the way, for us to get stuck in our old habits. But the key to transformation is just to keep practicing and remembering that there's this new way that feels better, and it's the type of connection that we want to have. And what does that actually look like in my life? For example, when I feel angry, what do I do with my anger? I might know what I don't want to do, but what do I want to do with it? And there are some very specific things we can do. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that we have at least one small young person in the room. So I'm going to choose my words carefully tonight as I'm going through this to make sure that I'm sensitive to the all ages group here. But let's say there's something that I know caused me harm when I was growing up. You know what? Maybe I started my parenting that way, but I also know that when I have the same type of big feeling that my own parents or caregivers had, what's this thing I want to do? As I mentioned, let's stick with anger for a second. And I'm going to talk about anger specifically because it tends to be one of the trickiest things out there, one of the trickiest feelings. But it's not a bad feeling. Even anger can be a wonderful gift to us because anger usually is telling us something that we need to know. All emotions are messengers. They're all here with a message for us, and our job is to be still and quiet long enough to figure out what's the message that I need to get here, and what do I want to do with this message? So here is where some of the magic happens when we are trying to transform our parenting. So if, for example, I feel anger rising up in my belly, and it might happen really, really quickly. My child might do something. By the way, I'm a mama too. I've got a child here downstairs eating her dinner right now. And we might sometimes have anger rise up in our body and we think, oh, I'm just going to respond this way that I always have because it's what I know. But when we can pause for a moment and say, all right, I'm feeling anger, there's something wonderful we can do. First of all, name it. Name the emotion you're feeling. There is a brilliant neuroscientist by the name of Daniel J. Siegel who talks about, and his co-author for many parenting books, Tina Payne Bryson, they talk about name it to frame it. When we name the emotion we're feeling, it automatically diffuses some of it. And that's exactly what we want, right? Because if we're feeling anger, we don't want to just act on it before we have a time to process it and think about the effects of our actions or anything like that. So what do we do if we start feeling this anger rise up? You know what? Okay, ooh, I'm feeling really mad right now. We simply name it. And simply by naming our anger for what it is, we actually start using a different part of our brain. Anger comes from a lower part of the brain that essentially is designed to keep us safe. If you go back, many, many, many years in history, all of our feelings, including the ones that feel easier, like happiness and joy and surprise and things like that, they come from a very, very primitive part of the brain. And if you look back in history, our brains had to respond quickly to threats. Because if, for example, there was, and this was not when we were living in houses or when we had indoor plumbing or anything like that. I'm talking back when people were nomadic and everybody was living outdoors all the time. If there was a wild animal, if there was an invading group of people, if there was some sort of threat that was unexpected, people had to be able to respond very, very quickly. So it makes sense that sometimes our feelings come up very, very quickly and we want to act on them. That part of our brain is designed to keep us safe. However, we have another part of our brain that's rational. And this part of our brain doesn't actually even fully develop until we're about 25 to 30 years old. So, quick little parenting tip. Sometimes we wonder, oh my goodness, can my child not even think about the consequences of their actions? Don't they know the effect they're having on others? Don't they know this would make me so mad? Well, being able to take other people's perspectives doesn't reliably happen until children are in their late teens. Think ahead to the effects of our own actions, the consequences of our own actions, that doesn't even reliably happen until we are between 25 and 30 years old, as I mentioned. So this is good information to have as a parent because sometimes it's super tempting to get angry with our children and say, I can't believe they did that. It's like they didn't think about the effects of their actions. Well, odds are good that they didn't because that part of their brain literally doesn't even exist yet. And if it doesn't exist, we can't hold them completely accountable for it. It's kind of like asking them to, swing a tennis racket from an arm that hasn't even fully grown in, right? Same thing is true for this part of the brain. If it's not fully developed, we can't be expecting them to use it regularly. So coming back to naming it to frame it, this is really helpful to us because it helps engage the part of our brain that says, you know what? I don't need to react in a big, explosive, potentially scary way because I'm an adult and I've got some skills, I've got some tools I can use to help keep me peaceful. And we actually have, it's not very long, but we have about statistically 6 seconds in between when our brain senses danger and we want to react and when we actually do react. So if we can take a pause and say, wait a minute, what do I want to do with this anger right now? What do I want to do with this frustration? It can slow us down just enough that we don't turn into that explosive, scary parent that we don't want to be in the first place. Well, how in the world do we do that if we are feeling triggered? How do we do that if we are feeling angry? So Couple of tools, and you can do them along with me if you are watching the video. And the reason I'm asking you to do them along with me is that it's really easy for us to forget what we've only heard. If we actually do them together a little bit, we can start to create some muscle memory so that the next time we are triggered in a parenting situation, we actually have a tool to help keep us calm. So a couple of things you can do. First of all, I'll give you 3 different tools you can use. One thing that you always have with you is your breath. Now, when we're angry and when we are responding from that place of feeling triggered, feeling like we need to keep our bodies safe, we automatically turn into very shallow breathing. We need shallow breathing when we're sprinting. We need shallow breathing when we are fighting. We need shallow breathing when we need quick physical action. The thing is, unless our child is like running out into traffic or doing some sort of a safety thing that requires our immediate attention, most of the time, we actually don't have an urgent need to respond. What we can do instead is simply get out of shallow breathing mode and instead find a belly breath. All you have to do is, if you inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, but make your exhale approximately twice as long as your inhale. So you breathe in through your nose and then long, long exhale out of your mouth. So I will do, and depending what you're physically comfortable with, you can alter this a little bit, but you can breathe in through your nose for about a count of 3 and then blow it out for about a count of 6. So let me go ahead and do the counting for you, but I want you to practice this with me so that next time you're feeling angry, you can remember, breathe this way, because this helps keep the rational, the calm, under perspective taking part of our brain online while we are feeling triggered anyway. So let's practice this together. Breathe in through your nose for a count of 1, 2, 3, and then open your mouth and breathe out for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just by doing this, you literally have calmed down your nervous system. If anybody wants to do one more with me, it can be a really good way to reinforce this is what you're learning. So quick set of 3 through your nose. Breathe in 1, 2, 3. Breathe out through your mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Believe it or not, your nervous system, if you did this along with me, your nervous system is literally calmer than it was before you did this exercise with me. Your blood pressure has literally dropped a few points just by doing this. You can also practice this even when you are feeling calm. In fact, I encourage you to do this when you are feeling calm, because it's just like the marathon runner doesn't wake up on marathon day and say, you know what, today I'm just going to go run a marathon, right? No, they don't do that. They train, they practice, they work for it for months and months ahead of time so that when race day is here, they have the skills and the tools ready to do it. So the more you can practice this when you are peaceful, the more you will remember when you're angry, oh yeah, do that breathing thing, because it will become more second nature to you. I'm going to give you another tool that you can use right now. I said I would give you 3. The next one is, especially if you are feeling angry, and this can be particularly helpful if your relationship has ever involved physicality. Even if you, hang on one second, I'm having a little bit of an issue with my Zoom, so hang on for 1 second. I'm going to pause recording for 1 second. All right, tool number 2 that you can use is, especially if your relationships, either historically in your family of origin, or perhaps in romantic relationships that you've had, or in your parenting relationships, if they involved any sort of physicality that was not welcome to you. And I'm choosing my words carefully again, because I know we've got children in the room. But if there were physical parts to this that were not safe to you, you can create a sense of safety, even around anger, by, it's going to sound easy, but it actually works. Once again, put your arms around yourself and squeeze. It's like giving yourself a great big hug. Everybody remembers subconsciously, not consciously, of course, but we know about children that babies like being swaddled, right? Babies like that feeling of having been in the womb. Babies like being close like this. Well, we all felt safe when we were in the womb. And when we recreate this hugging situation for ourselves, it gives us, on a very, very basic brain level, that same kind of safety that we had back very, very back at the beginning of our life before we were even born yet. So you can give yourself a great big hug and squeeze. It also helps take your arms and your hands out of the situation. So especially if you feel tempted to do something that might not be physically comfortable to the child, as long as the child is safe and you're not needing to intervene for safety reasons, you can do this with your arms and squeeze. And I'll give everybody a second to practice with me if they feel called to do that, because this grabbing and squeezing also creates a sense of safety in the nervous system and can help give you a moment to keep this part of your brain online where you think, what are the effects of my actions? Basically, it just slows you down. So you can say, what kind of parent do I want to be? What do I want to do right now? And the last one that I will give you is you can push against any big, steady, immobile object. It might be a kitchen counter, it might be a wall, but just grab it. And as long as it's not going to slide out of the way, you would push and push and push. If you do not have something like that, you can use your own hands, just lock them together and pull. But basically, you want to be engaging your large muscle groups, because when you engage your large muscle groups, it helps release chemicals in your body. Those same chemicals are the chemicals that tell your body that it's safe. And what we all need when we are feeling triggered is an inner sense of safety. So these are 3 different things you can do with your body when you're feeling frustrated, so that you are less likely to be the opposite of the peaceful parent that you want to be with your child in front of you. Now, a couple more thoughts before I open this up to questions. And I realize you might be thinking, wait a minute, hold on, I wanted some tools like, do I do timeout, or do I do this or that? That's child-centric. And first of all, I don't actually recommend timeouts, because timeouts are problematic in their own way, but you can do a parenting timeout. You can take some breaths with your child. You can say, let's take a time out together. There are lots of things you can do to co-regulate so both of you feel peaceful together, rather than, you know what, I don't want to deal with you right now, because from the child's perspective, that doesn't feel safe to them. That being said, if you need a moment to calm yourself down, if the alternative is doing something that would not be safe to your child, by all means, timeout is a major upgrade. So you know your own needs and your own situation. So if you need a moment, then by all means do that. But if you're at a place where you feel like, I don't actually need to send my child away, this is just hard right now, go outside if you can, get some fresh air, sit and read a story together for a few minutes. There are lots of ways where you can connect and you can co-regulate together, rather than escalating and having things turn out in ways that you don't want them to turn out. So, last thing that I think I'll cover for this evening is, many of us grew up, myself included sometimes, depending on the scenario, many of us grew up feeling that we deserved punishment, that perhaps we weren't worthy of our caregiver's love. Perhaps there was something about us that was so flawed that we simply weren't lovable, or we simply weren't worthy, or we simply weren't, whatever the case may be. We learn these beliefs between the ages of 2 and 7, and many of us grow up without growing out of them. Many of us still have the same beliefs about our worthiness or lack thereof that we had when we were very little children, again, between ages 2 and 7. So what can we do with these beliefs? First of all, you can know beyond the shadow of a doubt that you have always been worthy of love. You have always been worthy of forgiveness. You have always been worthy of compassion. You never deserved punishment. No one ever had the right to harm you in any way because you have always been worthy of perfect, beautiful, unconditional love. And it's so tempting to think, yeah, but there was this time that I did this thing, and yeah, I definitely needed to be punished for that. Well, what would happen if your parent or your caregiver had come to you in that moment when you were doing that thing and said, you know what? We all make mistakes. How can we work through this together? How can I support you in this? What would that have felt like to you as you were growing up? Because fundamentally, we all know we're lovable. We all know we are worthy of love. And when we are parenting, when we can remember that our inner child deserved that love, we then have more of that love and compassion to share with the children in our own lives. And we can say, you know what? My caregivers may have done what they knew best, but I can choose a different path. I know that I have always been worthy of love, and so is my child. And I want to parent in a way that someday, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, when my child hears, oh, I'm going to tell your parent about that, your child is going to say, you know what? I'm so glad because I know they're on my side and they're going to help me through whatever this is. I want you to be the kind of parent that your children run to when they struggle rather than run away from because they're afraid. The key to doing that is finding compassion and love and being the kind of peaceful parent that makes it safe for them to be totally vulnerable with you, even when they mess up. Because you know that your kids are great. You know your kids are worthy of love 100% of the time. But I'm speaking to your inner child for a moment here too, because your inner child has always been worthy of that perfect love as well. And when you believe that, when you know in your heart of hearts that you also have always been worthy of love and gentle, peaceful treatment, you have all the more of that love to share and to pass along to the children in your life. Well, that's actually all I'm going to say for tonight. I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to open it up for maybe 10, 15 minutes worth of questions or feedback or anything anybody just wants to run past me. I'm here for you. So thank you for listening. I realize that's a long time to listen. So I appreciate you. I'll stop recording now and I'll open it up for questions.